one of the most important changes that's happened in Australia is that there are so many Australian citizens now who are aware of the potential risks that they're more careful about the danger of co-optation or influence by the CCP and its agents in Australia. And the intelligence and other agencies in Australia have also undertaken a kind of quiet education campaign in some of the major institutions. I'm thinking of businesses and universities in particular, where CCP influence had become quite strong over the previous couple of decades, really. And that was necessary because some of those institutions, particularly universities, were extremely resistant to essentially facing up to what was happening. There was a great deal of denial going on in universities with senior administrators who had been essentially captured by the dream of money and linkages with China, this great rising power. And so, more so at some universities than others, in the first instance, they just refused to accept that it was a problem, in fact, mocked it. They mocked the security services and the moves taken by governments. But governments have really persuaded them, or in some cases compelled them, to take seriously CCP interference and influence in their institutions. At a more general level, the government has introduced quite a wide range of legislation, specifically directed, although not naming, China's interference in Australia, from protection of critical infrastructure, from ownership and penetration by malign foreign governments or principals operating on behalf of malign foreign governments, up to the really landmark foreign interference legislation. Now, that law was really a world first because, you know, when we started to wake up to what the CCP was doing, we really didn't have a way of thinking about it. You know, we traditionally have two kinds of ways of thinking about relations with foreign governments. One is influence, lobbying, pressure, diplomacy, and the other is espionage and various, you know, Cold War covert activities. But we didn't have a way of thinking about the broad range of influence and interference activities that China had developed and had become extremely good at. And so, first of all, we broadly in Australia need to get our heads around it. As one expert said to me, who was some years ahead of me in thinking about this, he said, you know, Clive, we don't have the concepts to think about what the CCP is doing. And I thought that was so true. We didn't have the categories in which to put the activities the CCP was up to so we could understand it. And a lot of people were kind of deeply misled by trying to think of it in Cold War terms. That's a real mistake. And so Australia developed this foreign interference legislation passed in 2018, which outlawed, with severe penalties potentially, any covert activity undertaken on behalf of a foreign power or a foreign principal, which is aimed at influencing the political process in Australia or interfering with the exercise of a democratic right by a citizen, any citizen. So that might be tailing or pressuring citizens, it might be disrupting legitimate protests, it might be interfering with petitions by pro-democracy Chinese people, for example. Any attempt on behalf of a foreign principal to disrupt the activities of citizens in their going about their exercising their democratic rights is now a serious offence in Australia. And I think that law, although personally I would like to see it enforced much more comprehensively. But nevertheless, I think it sent a very strong message to the CCP's forces in Australia, everywhere from the embassy down to local United Front groups, that they'd better watch out, that a lot of what they were doing is now illegal, with potentially up to 10 years in jail if they're convicted of it.